All right, what's up, fantasy fans? As always, I'm Shay from the channel Zachary Shay, and today I'm going to be doing a uh, channel update and a overall review of the best books I read in January, the books I'm most excited to read about in February, and some channel news that I just want to get out of the way really quick. So first off, let me see if I can. Yeah. First off, I just want to go over. Soon I'll be taking my TEAS exam, which is a basically an exam to see if I can get into nursing school. I have a really good GPA, and I just need to do well on this TEAS exam. And the applications for my nursing school begin in March, so it's March 1st to April 1st. So I'm gonna try to take that exam in February. So I read about 7 or 8 books this month and quite a bit of comics and manga. And this coming month, I'm really going to have to narrow it down to just a few books that I'm really excited about. So I probably will read maybe 4 or 5 books in February and also February is the shortest month of the year. So you won't see my usual turnout of books, my usual reading quantity. So that out of the way, some things that I want to announce that had me really excited. I got not only my first comment slash subscriber from a big time booktuber, but Jake from Nerd Level Rising was kind enough to comment on multiple of my videos. And this came at a time where I was really doubting if I was making the right content and whether I was, I did have enough to stay in the booktube space, in the comic space, the manga space. I was wondering if my opinions, mattered, not really mattered, but I was kind of losing a little bit of confidence with it. And when Jake from Nerd Level Rising commented on my stuff, I don't even think he realized how big of an impact that had on me, you know, getting the camera back out and recording another video. And then probably the most exciting thing that's happened since I started this channel, my unboxing of The Way of Edan got shared by Dr. Philip Chase himself, which I am a huge fanboy of Dr. Philip Chase. I love everything he does relating to the fantasy genre. I love his work with Steven Erikson. He translated a Malazan poem into Old English, and I remember I would watch that video over and over again just because I thought it was so cool to see these two intellectuals with love for the fantasy genre interact, and it was just awesome. And I'll link both of their channels down below. But okay, so what I read last month and what I thought of it. So first off, believe the first thing I really got into this month was Changes by Jim Butcher, which many laud as the best book in the Dresden Files, and I am inclined to agree. I may put Deadbeat and Grave Peril a little bit above it for my own personal enjoyment, but this is a as close to a 5-star book as a Dresden Files book will get. I'd say 5 stars. I do really love the Dresden Files, but in the same way a lot of Wheel of Time fans love Wheel of Time and they know it's flawed, I personally don't like Wheel of Time, but that's neither here nor there. I don't like speaking negatively about books, even if they're not, my cup of tea. But I did read all of Wheel of Time. Anyway, I digress. So Dresden Files has some flaws. I don't like the way that Harry Dresden views women sometimes, and I know that that's supposed to be a part of his character and an inherent flaw. But when I read Side Jobs, and this will get into my views on this book, we had a short story from the point of view of Karen Murphy, who is in fact a woman, and even some of her perception about women and gender roles I didn't completely align personally with, and it made me think maybe Jim Butcher has these views. I don't know. I think Jim Butcher's an amazing writer and an amazing human being. I think if there are some problematic views in his book, it's not, it's not intentional. And I do think he is not, I'm not saying that Jim Butcher is sexist or none of that. I just think some of the ways he can write gender differences is a little bit awkward and a little bit extra. But I would give this 5 stars. I would give Side Jobs, with the exception of the first story, which takes place before Stormfront, the story with Karen Murphy, and the story with Thomas, and the story with Michael. So we had 4 stories in here that I thought were pretty essential Dresden reading. And if those were the only 4 stories in this collection, it'd probably be like a 4-star collection. Some of those dragged it down. I'd give it a 3 star. Definitely my least favorite reading experience with Dresden Files, but very few Dresden File books drop below 4 stars. Um, Most Dresden Files books sit at like a 4.5 stars with me, where it's like a little bit flawed, but my enjoyment was way up here. So my enjoyment wasn't quite as high as the usual Dresden File books. That being said, I do think that the Dresden Files is an amazing series. Harry Dresden is my favorite wizard in all of literature. I put him at the very tippity top of my top 10 wizards list, and I think Jim Butcher is a brilliant writer, and Harry Dresden is just an awesome character. All right, so one author in the month of January completely blew me away. I'd never read any works by this man before, and I just want to say bravo to Christopher Buehlman. Black Tongue Thief was a 6 out of 5 stars for me. And then this recontextualized, The Daughter's War recontextualized what I thought a 6 star read was. Maybe it's just because I read these so close back to back. I listened to this one on audiobook and I read this one, there was a preview at the end of this audiobook. I read like the first 2 chapters on audio and then read, the rest of the book actually reading it. Not that listening to audiobooks isn't reading, but I'm just saying like I read it physical. And Christopher Buehlman's prose style, his dialogue, his just his overall way he conveys the story to the reader is just, I think every fantasy author should take notes on what he did here. His voice is very distinct. If you think Steven Erikson, Mark Lawrence, Robin Hobb, Janny Wirtz, like much like who I believe are the greats of the genre, he has a style that is very distinct. If you read a Christopher Buehlman paragraph, you will know that that is a Christopher Buehlman paragraph. China Mieville is another author where you read their style and you know immediately that was a Christopher Buehlman paragraph. Oh, I forgot to grab this one. But now we're getting into some of the negatives. And I hate to say this because I only like to hype up indie authors, but if I'm going over all the books I read this month, I read Gates of Hope by J.E. Hannaford. She's an SBFBO finalist. I highly recommend you go read her book because she put a lot of effort into this and she's an SBFBO finalist and that should be celebrated. That being said, I am mainly a prose, dialogue, and character centered reader. I don't care about magic systems as much or world building as much. Those are more like flavorings, but the main entree for me is sharply written dialogue, evocative prose, and just really deep characters. And I will say, Brandon Sanderson fans will find something to love in J.E. Hannaford. I will never put down an indie author or an author of any kind because I think J.E. Hannaford is a great writer and a great person. I'm just saying it didn't work for me. I thought the character motivations and it felt to me like the 3 main POV characters were a little too similar. One of the characters, Elisa, I thought if I were to compare the 3, Elisa was probably the standout for me that I enjoyed the most. Surin's storyline probably worked the least for me, and the main boy who felt like the main boy in this one, I think his name was Darren? Something like that. He was okay, but I just thought the dialogue was a little exposition heavy, and I thought the characters weren't really what I was looking for. That being said, I am going to give Gates of Sorrow, I think it's Gates of Sorrow's book 2, another try because maybe, I will always give an author a second chance, and her world building is so imaginative. Like if you like that Cosmere-esque sci fantasy type of storytelling, this story takes place on, you follow one girl as she's on a moon, and then you follow 2 other people that are on the planet, but this planet is covered in craters that are the only place that can house human life, and above the craters is this atmosphere that there are all these dangerous creatures that are predators for humanity, and it's got some really interesting world building in here, and I do think Brandon Sanderson fans will find a lot to love. That being said, it was my least favorite book of this month, but that is not a failing of J.E. Hannaford. It just wasn't to my tastes. Now, speaking of not to my tastes, this I enjoyed more than Gates of Hope, but we're going to talk about the I don't know, Abercrombie's the king of grimdark, but Michael R. Fletcher is able to Michael R. Fletcher takes up a very different space within the grimdark subgenre of fantasy, and he does it remarkably well. I think this is the number one author, aside from maybe Rob J. Hayes. They both kind of go neck and neck in this, but these are the main two authors. It's crazy. I'm about speaking of Rob J. Hayes, I'm about to talk about his book. But these two authors really take up the space that I feel like Joe Abercrombie fans, like if you enjoy Joe Abercrombie, I think you would really enjoy Michael R. Fletcher and Rob J. Hayes. But of these authors, these three authors that I'm talking about, I do believe Michael R. Fletcher has the darkest stories, and I really loved his Manifest Delusion series. I really loved, his City of Sacrifice series, and I actually want to do a dedicated video on this. And this book, specifically book 2 of this omnibus, you start to see the whole universe. He's kind of doing this little grimdark Cosmere thing, right? Like we have 3 different planets or realms, realities where these things are happening in these 3 different series. And in this omnibus, book 2, She Dreams in Blood of the Obsidian Path, we get a little bit of tying in to Cities of Sacrifice first off, but it hints at connections to Manifest Illusions. But the book I read this month was Blackstone Heart, and I have about 20 pages left of She Dreams in Blood, which is the second book. This covers Blackstone Heart, She Dreams in Blood, and An End to Sorrow. So it's 3 books in one omnibus collection. I highly recommend it. I think it's you're getting an amazing deal for your buck here, because you're getting 3 awesome books all contained in one omnibus. And Michael R. Fletcher is just a really good dialogue writer, really good character writer. I will say this was a 4-star read for me, not a 5-star like Manifest Illusions, because the main character is so evil that sometimes it grades on me to read so much of him. And I don't know, it kind of felt like Jorg, but I went into the Broken Empire knowing Jorg was a pretty despicable human being. I went into this thinking Crane was going to be flawed, but overall a character you could root for, and Crane's a monster. He's a monster. Now, speaking of a character that is a monster, this is how you do grimdark right. This is a 5-star read, because this character is incredibly flawed, incredibly gray. She is a villain in the sense of the word, much like Crane, but she never becomes the mustache twirling type of villain. She's very nuanced in the way her character is presented to the reader and the way her motivations are presented to the reader, that you're always on her side. And also with Crane, it's like he probably is the most evil entity in his world. Not so with Ascara Helsing. She has been dealt a bad hand, and I do think she's not a good person, but I'll be damned if she isn't a character you root for. And this is probably the best protagonist I have read since Nona Gray last year. I don't know, because Galva from the Daughters War by Christopher Buehlman was so amazing, but I might have to give it to Ascara. I don't know. It's between those two. And Kinch is also had a lot of great protagonists this month. Now, that's what I read this month, and if I had to say my favorite book of January, I'd probably go with The Daughters War. And favorite protagonist is between Ascara and Galva from the Daughters War. So what will I be reading next month? I already told you that I won't be able to read as much, but okay, first off, this is what I might not get to, but I really want to get to it. Okay, first, I'm definitely going to finish To Your Eternity. This is volume 21. It started out as like a fantasy series, then they got into a modern day arc, and then now it's like this futuristic, post-apocalyptic, dystopian type thing, and it's got some amazing thematic work on where our society is headed and the price of popularity and prestige and how that can kind of cloud our judgment. Kind of reminded me of a Black Mirror episode, honestly. But I also want to get more into my favorite comic book writer of all time, aside from maybe Alan Moore, Tom King. And I want to read Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, because that movie's coming out soon, and I've heard that this is just an amazing run on Kara Zor-El, I think her name is. Then I also want to read the Sheriff of Babylon, not the Pride of Baghdad, that's a Brian K. Vaughan book, but the Sheriff of Babylon, which is, I know it's about war in the Middle East, and I know it doesn't necessarily paint the U.S. in the best of light, but instead of being like this novel that criticizes the US or criticizes this power or this power, which I believe that, some criticism is due. Um, but instead of doing that, it just looks at the humanity and looks at these people that are harmed by war, and doesn't really try to make a political statement, but instead just makes a statement about humanity and empathy. And I think we need that kind of story right now, especially with what's been going on globally. And if you're a US citizen like me, some of these things are worrying, and I think that we should not turn a blind eye to the suffering of others. And I think that's what Tom King had in mind when he wrote Sheriff of Babylon. I will be giving this a dedicated review, and probably all of Tom King's books will get a dedicated review because I just think he's phenomenal. If you're new to comics and don't know where to start, I highly recommend Mr. Miracle by Tom King. And then I'm going to read Tom King's solo book. It's not part of DC or Marvel, A Once Crowded Sky. And this is a modern day superhero retelling of Dante's Divine Comedy, is what I've heard it pitched as. It's supposed to evoke a lot of the same themes and feelings as Dante's Inferno. I've read Dante's Divine Comedy, went way over my head. I didn't know what the heck was going on, but I feel like Tom King will retell that, mythic poem in a more understandable light. It won't be like reading Finnegan's Wake. It won't be extremely obtuse. And then the real things that are occupying my headspace right now, aside from finishing The Obsidian Path by Michael R. Fletcher, I'm halfway through book 2 right now. The Way of Edan by Philip Chase. I am on chapter 1. Prologue blew me away. And ironically, in my unboxing, I was like, oh yeah, after a grimdark like Obsidian Path, I'm gonna want some, good old fashioned traditional fantasy, which The Way of Edan does deliver on those nostalgic traditional fantasy, vibes. But it's a lot grimdarker than I thought it. I wouldn't call it grimdark, but it's a lot more adult and darker than I was expecting. Especially because Philip Chase is like such a, optimistic and positive energy on BookTube. I wasn't expecting him to have that killer in him, but I can attest that he does. And then I'm so late to this. I'm so late to the Sun Eater, the Sun Eater hype, but I'm halfway through Empire of Silence right now, and oh my gosh, everybody was absolutely right about Sun Eater. Already, without even finishing book 1, I predict that this will be my second favorite sci-fi of all time, behind Red Rising. So it may beat out Locked Tomb for my second favorite sci-fi of all time. I'm sorry, Locked Tomb fans. I still love the Locked Tomb. I think the Locked Tomb is, magnificent, nothing short of magnificent. I gave both book 2 and 3 5 stars. I feel like this is a 6-star book. I feel like this is going to be on that Daughter's War level of just absolutely blew me away. And this goes for both of these. Both of these books. Way of Edan, I'm only 1 chapter in and I'm already completely enthralled. I'm sorry, Michael R. Fletcher, but I had to pause your books a little bit to get into these two because they were just calling my name. But I'll get back to Crane once I've had my fun with Day Raven and Hadrian Marlowe. But yeah, so if you like what I do here, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe. Please let me know what you read in January, if you enjoyed it, if you think I would like it, recommend it, what you plan on reading in February, if you're a fan of Philip Chase's Edan series or the Sun Eater series or the works of Michael R. Fletcher. Go ahead, down in the comment section. I'll try to be quick and respond to any questions, recommendations, or comments you have. Peace.